Welcome to the SIWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. We're here again with one of our guest mentors, Nora, who comes to us from a HR background, and we're going to dive deep into the realm of HR. So we're going to hopefully demystify it for those that are interested in getting into HR, and hopefully bust some of the myths and misconceptions. Because a lot of people, when they reach out, it's like, oh, HR, yeah, they're the recruiting folks, right? Or they're the people that you go to when you have to deal with harassment, or if you're not getting paid the right amount, those are the people you reach out to. But it's so much more. And yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about kind of your background in HR, maybe some of the different names and evolutions and different things, and then we'll probably dive into kind of the different components of it, and hopefully shed some light in terms of HR as a potential career path for folks out there.
Thank you for having me. And yes, as you were mentioning those things, one of the other things that kind of came to mind that was a pet peeve is how much vacation do I have, or how do I log in my vacation? So yeah, like there's definitely lots to talk about from that side. Just a little bit about my background. I want to say, wow, time flies by. Like over 7 years of HR experience. Began in talent acquisition, and then moved into more of an HR generalist role. Moved back to talent acquisition, back into more of an HR generalist role, and now in a HR business partner role, which is still in HR, but less on the tactical side and more so on the strategic, big picture. HR work side of things, and yeah, it's been a very interesting path that hasn't always been upward, but those are kind of the areas that I've been in HR, but as a generalist, and we can talk about that a little bit more.
Sure.
But as a generalist, you kind of touch on a lot of different areas within HR as well. So I've gotten the opportunity to work in a lot of areas through my generalist experience.
Yeah, so HR, and some companies don't even use the word HR anymore. They use like people or
People
talent, and like
ops, yeah.
people ops, or human capital, or human experience, or customer or employee success. Those are some
Yes.
common terms,
Yeah.
but they're basically the people of the business, like dealing with your employees and those there, and making sure that they're happy and productive and all that. So you mentioned that you were in recruiting and acquisition and staffing. Sometimes those are different names used for the same thing. And then the generalist is one of those roles that basically they're typically in smaller companies, right? And then they do pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. There's a lot of different titles out there, which a lot of the titles I like, right? People ops, employee experience. There's talent acquisition. There's like advisor, talent acquisition, strategist, talent and brand manager. So there's a lot of areas and a lot of different titles. But typically in talent acquisition, you know, um, it can look different from organization to organization. Fundamentally what you're doing is you're recruiting, and whether that's recruiting internally or bringing in external talent, whether that's for specific business units or functions, or if it's for specific programs. You could be a recruiter just dedicated to entry level grads. You could be dedicated to bringing in diverse candidates or diverse hires, or you could just be working in a recruitment agency and you have your own client and your own book of business. So recruitment can look different. I just from a personal perspective, it's really great to get that experience early on in your career in HR, because it builds a lot of key skill sets that you're going to have to take in a lot of different areas, which is strong verbal and nonverbal communication, being able to build relationships quickly with your hiring leader, with your candidate, being able, especially as a new grad, to step out of your shell a little bit if you're in recruiting, because you have to, for example, lead an interview. Sometimes you have to have difficult conversations when you get to things like an offer letter or salary, or negotiating somebody, relocating to a different role. So it's definitely a very fast paced and fun space, I think, to work in, because a lot of times it can be challenging if you're working for recruiting for tech roles in a really competitive environment. You also learn how to market job postings, and you learn also a lot about diversity inclusion, depending on whether or not your organization has goals for D&I through recruitment. So it's also one of the easier, I don't want to say easier, but it's one of the more common job postings that you'll probably see in HR recruiters, because a lot of times companies have just a high volume of recruitment, right? And it's high volume work. I've never been in an organization where recruitment was ever had ever a slow time. It's always been the busiest function, right? So there's a
Right.
lot of it's high volume work. It's sometimes repetitive, but it's really fast paced. And there's a constant change in all organizations, people getting a new job, people leaving and whatnot. So it's easy as a new grad to get into HR through recruitment, specifically because when you see HR as HR roles, for every and don't quote me on this statistics. I learned this in school a really long time ago, so it might not be as accurate, but for every 100 employees, I believe that you need one HR person to support on average. And organizations probably stretch that now because we have a lot of self-service models, we have a lot of technology that streamlines processes. So that ratio is probably a lot different now. So you could see that the HR roles, aside from recruitment, aren't going to be as readily available as a role in recruitment. So it's really good to kind of get your foot in the door and start getting that experience through that space in HR. And some people love it and just stay in it. As career recruiters, I personally thought I was going to stay in it because I enjoyed it so much.
That's amazing. And I think one thing to point out is what you kind of briefly touched upon, where there are some agencies, and with any HR function, sometimes they're outsourced, right? So
Yeah.
for smaller companies, they don't have a person to do any specific thing because they don't have that 100 employees. If I have 50 employees, I don't even have necessarily enough to hire that one
Exactly.
full-time HR person. So they might use a acquisition staffing recruiting agency to do their hiring, right? They might have an in-house one too, but there's a difference in terms of the roles. Can you speak a little bit, because I think you've been in a recruiting role when you were in an agency, and then also when you were in internal HR. You were in both types of roles, right?
So I've never actually been on the agency side. I've
Okay,
always been internally,
all right.
but I have worked in recruitment in a startup. So it was like really fast paced. So you'd almost feel like it was always busy, and we were recruiting like crazy. So you'd almost think that it was an agency, but it wasn't. But I've known a lot of colleagues of mine working in agencies, and I've also worked with them internally, had them as clients to help us fill roles in the past. And there are there are differences, right? As an agency, if you're somebody who likes change a lot and likes to learn about different industries, and doesn't always want to be working on the same thing, an agency is a really good spot for you, right? Because you can have wide array of clients, and you can be filling roles for different industries, and different types of clients and different companies, so you're always learning, right? And you're growing your network through that. If you're also somebody that a lot of times people look at agency recruitment and they compare it a little bit to sales, and it's not sales, but a lot of the process does kind of mimic the sales cycle, because oftentimes agencies will require these recruiters to go out and bring that business in, right? So create that client relationship, identify what roles that that client needs to recruit for, and get that business for that agency. So you're also playing two hats. You're playing the recruiter hat, and you're also playing the sales hat. So again, for somebody early in their career that doesn't know whether or not they want to really be in HR for the rest of their career, it's a good opportunity, because you can easily take that experience and you can pivot and go into sales, right?
Right.
So you kind of have opened two doors for yourself at the beginning of your career, versus an in-house recruiter. Again, you could be working on all different types of roles for all different types of business functions, depending on how large your organization is. Or you could be just dedicated to being a program campus recruiter, or just for a specific business unit. It'll look different for every single organization, but for the most part, that business, right? The roles that they're recruiting for, the system. You're not bringing that business in, right? They're coming to you and saying, we need to fill this role. So that's kind of the difference. It's that sales piece, and I guess also it's the added level of having to bring that business in, and having to bring those clients in, um, as an external agency. could be a little bit tough. And oftentimes external agencies are actually competing against internal recruitment teams. So we'll hire an external agency, and so there's that added level of stress as an agency recruiter, because you want to bring that business in, and they already have a team, so you have to work sometimes twice as hard to get more candidates, or to search a little bit longer. Just some differences that come across when I think about that. Yeah.
What I was reading between the lines in there is that if you have a sense of like competitiveness and kind of that fast-paced drive, then you'd probably thrive in a career or just a job in recruiting, because there is a bit of that, not necessarily with just other folks in the agency, maybe the HR team that you're working with or whatever. There's a bit of that competition, and because you always have to bring in the business, a little bit of that sales, then that would definitely help you in that regard. Are there any other kind of qualities or someone that say, you know what, this is probably going to allow you to become a better recruiter, talent acquisition person, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the nail. Like competitiveness, even if you're an in-house recruiter, right? You gotta be able to compete amongst yourself, because it's really stressful to have to recruit for a role, because a lot of times it's you're backfilling for somebody that's critical to the organization, for example, or almost every single, I'd say about 90% of the hiring managers want the role to be filled yesterday, right? So right, you're always in that spot of insane urgency, whether or not it's warranted. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So, you need to have that competition, whether it's between an agency, but you also need to be competitive, because candidates on the market, are like, it's a competitive talent market right now for specific talents that you're looking for, right? So you have to kind of be on the go. I'd say, being I don't really want to label it as an extrovert versus introvert. I don't like labeling that, but being somebody that's comfortable with reaching out and building relationships. So a strong relationship builder, and just being comfortable with building rapport quickly with somebody that you particularly don't know, because you, for example, need to get the most information that you can in 30 or 40 minutes in an interview, or on a call when you're connecting with a passive candidate, right? You need to build that rapport right off the bat. So being a strong relationship builder, strong communicator, are definitely some things, and somebody that likes to work in a fast-paced environment for most recruitment roles, right? Some are, again, program recruitment, which are cyclical. Doesn't mean that they're not busy. I know some of my friends in campus recruitment are some of the busiest people I know, but that's a little bit more cyclical. It's more planned. But for the most part, somebody that's okay working in a fast-paced environment, that's almost like an ad hoc. A lot of times, requisitions just come up. They just come up. People just, they leave. And sometimes you can forecast that, and sometimes you can't actually anticipate it, right? So
Yeah, and I love how you made that qualification about introvert and extrovert, because when you're connecting with someone one-on-one, like introverts can actually do quite well because they're trying to build that relationship. So just because you've been labeled or labeled yourself one, doesn't mean that recruiting is out for you. So I think we gave folks quite a good overview on the talent acquisition side. What about things like compensation and pay? So we talked about how one of the myths is like, hey, I didn't get my paycheck, or something happened where there's a rounding error, this and that, and that's one person we go to. Well, what was your experience like from a pay and benefits and compensation, total comp, that sort of perspective?
yeah, so I mean, right off the bat, I'll just answer that. If you didn't get your pay, if your pay stub's incorrect, you wouldn't go to compensation, you go to payroll.
Oh, fair enough.
So that's that just is telling with how many areas in HR there are that the average employee isn't aware of, and doesn't really have to be aware of, in all honesty. But you have compensation, you have payroll and benefits, you have in some organizations labor relations if you have a unionized staff force. You have the HR generalists, you have the talent acquisition specialists. Some organizations even have diversity and inclusion teams. They have talent management teams. So those teams only focus on, the developing our top talent, development programs, different types of mentorship programs, right? How are we increasing learning within the organization? You also have other teams like our HRIS, Workday HR technology and innovation teams, our HR analytics team, right? So there's so many pension and benefits. So pension in itself is a team that I'm going to be honest, like almost everybody in HR doesn't understand anything unless you're in pensions. It's complex work. So there's so many different areas within HR that you might not really think about, and a lot of people don't think about it. But if you're in a large enough organization, there are those opportunities, right? So just talking about my own personal experience, aside from being in talent acquisition, I think early on in a person's career, if you're able to land an HR generalist role, even if it's just for a year or 2 years, it's a really good opportunity because you'll get exposed to little snippets of some of those areas. Like I've done some LR work, I've done some comp work, I've done a lot of DNI work, talent management. So you'll be exposed to all of these things, and early on you can tell what you like and what you don't, or what you're good at, or what you'd like to pursue a little bit more, right? And that's how you can start to specialize, or you decide not to specialize, and you go into a more strategic role afterwards that's still kind of in the generalist overall function, but we're looking now at bigger picture stuff, long-term planning, and you're supporting more senior level leaders in their HR planning, and what they need from an HR support, right? So there's a lot of areas in HR that people don't think about. And some of the areas that are up and coming that might have not been around is our HR technology space. So I've been seeing a lot of HRIS, or human capital analyst roles, HR reporting roles posted nowadays, HR analytics roles. There's actually a really interesting HR analytics course at Queen, and a new one that's, I believe, titled People Analytics at York. So just even seeing these new courses and these these new roles and organizations is just telling that there's so many areas, and I think that there's going to be even newer areas that are more focused on technology and data within HR.
Yeah, it just goes to show how like managing people, HR, or whatever, is evolving, right? And there's constantly, especially with technology, a lot of new
Yeah.
things. I'd love if you kind of shed a little bit of light. So on each of these components, maybe not in detail, but if we talked about how like recruiting, where you want to have like a bit of a competitive character in there that would help you get ahead, in something like compensation, benefits, and pension. Those sound like a numbers person, right? Is
Yeah.
that fair to be that more the analytical research type of it? Is that the type of person that would thrive well in that area?
For sure. I mean, um, yeah, like different areas will require, different, or will play to people's preferences, right? So
Right.
if you like that client-facing experience, and you like, talking to people and meeting people and presenting, a role for you is going to be that recruitment role, or that generalist role, or that HR business partner role, because fundamentally you're kind of that bridge between the business and HR, right? And you're that client facing group. But then when you look at, what we call COEs, so more specialized areas in HR, right? Like compensation, pension, and benefits. Yeah, you're gonna want to be a numbers person, right? Like comp, you're doing a lot of analysis, you're doing a lot of market research. You're constantly looking at people's salaries and numbers, and different types of total comp packages. Same thing with benefits, and same thing with pensions. You're gonna want to be a numbers person. I'd even go as far as to say that, we have HR reporting as well in some organizations, which you're going to want to be an analytical person too. And for HR analytics, or any kind of HR technology space, you're probably not going to be client facing. Your
Right.
client is going to be HR internally. So, if you're comfortable, just doing projects internally, you like data, or you like numbers, and you like like really going into research and analysis, that's more of something for you. If you're somebody that likes negotiations, right, that really likes, almost like, you would be a lawyer in another world or another life, or you'd be interested in pursuing law, go into LR, labor relations, right? You're on the table and you're negotiating essentially a contract on behalf of management with the union representatives, right? So that's a really, specialized role, that's not in all industries, because not all industries are unionized, but that skill set takes time to build up. But it's a very, I find people that succeed in it have a tendency to like negotiations, to like, I'm not going to say arguments, but are good with arguing logical facts, and are comfortable with legal jargon, and not particularly want to always be client facing, but are comfortable presenting and talking with people externally.
Cool. So they're able to get their point across like clearly and
Exactly.
succinctly, and hopefully do a bit of persuasion along the way. So,
Yeah.
can you talk to us a little bit about kind of like learning and development and that aspect of the health? Because I know that's obviously a big and growing end with a lot of this online stuff. It's changed over kind of the course of COVID, but what are your thoughts in and experience in that realm?
Yeah, I love like that's a personal love for me. I really like what they do in NLR, sorry, in learning and development LD. But it depends from organization to organization. A lot of times you'll find them again. They are COE, so they are centers of excellence and expertise. So their clients are the the client facing HR reps, so myself or HR advisory, right? They will create the programs, they'll create the training modules, or they'll create the leadership development frameworks and our succession planning frameworks. They'll train us, and we'll go to the business and we'll execute on that, right? So but at the same time, that group also a lot of times are executive coaches, so they're certified to be executive coaches, and they engage in coaching and mentoring senior leaders across the organization. So I think that is a unique group, and people in that group should be comfortable with being able to train and being able to influence audiences at different levels, varying different seniority levels. I think that's a unique group, but you have to be passionate about teaching, and you have to have that patience and that ability to influence as a coach. So influencing without authority would be huge in that team, I think.
Yeah, I think I've heard where folks that are interested in teaching but don't necessarily want to go into like the boards and teach kids, that sort of thing, but they want to teach adults. L&D, learning and development, is a great place for them to
Yeah.
explore within HR. And you talk a little bit about like executive coaches. So there's like kind of performance management and things like annual reviews and stuff like that. Does that fall into a different categorization in HR as well?
So it depends on how the organization is structured, but a lot of
Sure.
times learning and development is kind of under talent management, right? And a lot of times, that development falls under them, because a performance review is essentially to support also the individual's development, and to check into their own performance. So it usually falls, like those programs usually fall under those groups. They create that framework, but they don't execute it, because they're not the ones that hold the relationship with the
Mm.
business, and they don't know the people in the business, right? But again, all organizations are different, but that's what you'll probably see in I'd say multinational kind of matrix type organizations.
Cool. And then you talked a little bit about some of the up and coming. I mean, they've been around for a while, but the HRIS, the HR tech folks, even on the payroll side. So the people that might thrive in those areas are ones that are a little bit more like tech savvy, interested in kind of process, in like the way things function, like systematizing, like business process and all that sort of stuff. Or is that the type of work they would be doing, or what other types of characteristics could someone in that area kind of have if they want to thrive in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that you don't even necessarily need a HR degree to work there. It
Okay.
obviously helps. But a lot of times, it depends on what they're doing. But a lot of times we have people that don't actually come from an HR background, but later on go and get their CHRP after they've been in our department for a while, just to understand the business a little bit more. But, I'd really say that the work would vary, right? If you already have an HCM set up, there's going to be that maintenance piece and sustainment. So people that are good at troubleshooting, are good at fixing, testing, answering, that day-to-day support and maintenance, and even training, right? So if there's a new application upgrade or tool or whatnot. And then there's also the other side where you're actually implementing new systems and new applications, and you're testing out the user experience. You're reconfiguring processes and automating them, right? And I think that just like as if you'd look at who would want to go into the tech industry. So if it's a project manager, maybe this person's really organized. Maybe this person, works well on key dates and is able to bring people on board and keep things moving and is a great relationship builder, right? So then that's a project manager. You'd also you might see that role in our HR IS team as well. You might find that we need developers or analytical people. So I'd say almost like think about it as just almost like a tech department within HR. You'd probably want similar skill sets, but it always helps if somebody has like a background in HR to get into that, whether that's a minor or whether they're just they graduated from HR but found themselves just tech savvy. They had a lot of acumen, and this is what they're kind of gravitating towards. But you're going to want somebody who's interested in technology and emergent technologies, because HR consistently is one of those places that is just really new to adopting technology as well. So there's a lot of emerging things coming on. So somebody that's like interested in innovation and interested in bringing new ideas to the table as well.
Cool. Yeah, and obviously this could span all the different areas, because you'll have technology for recruiting, technology for learning,
Exactly.
technology for performance management, and all that sort of stuff as well. And obviously for getting paid for your payroll and stuff like that, right? In the discussions you mentioned a couple of times, so HR generalist, and then you mentioned HR business partner. So what is there a difference between the two, or how would you characterize the difference between the two?
Sure. So I would say that, an HR generalist is somebody that supports the business more on the tactical side.
Okay.
So, the generalist function typically deals with day-to-day people operational tasks or issues, versus if you have, an HR business partner, they're kind of like the middleman between the business and HR. They help execute strategic priorities and strategies from a people perspective. So they try to understand what the business's strategic intentions are and goals, and they build people plans around that, right? And they're looking at more big picture stuff. So some of their HR work might be a project that will impact the organization 3 years out, versus if you're an HR generalist, what you might be doing is you might doing workforce planning for the next 6 months or the next year, right? So both equally important, but a little bit different, and the level, like the skill sets required are also going to be different in two roles, right? One deals with is working with frontline managers more so, because again, you're dealing with tactical people operational issues, and one role on the HR business partner side is dealing with more strategic issues. So the individuals that you support from an HR perspective are senior leaders.
Right. So what I took from that, HR generalist tends to be more kind of day-to-day, kind of more on the ground, and then business partners more on that strategic side, big picture, focused on leadership and the direction of the company and how you bring the people on board, versus the generalist is day-to-day. So yeah, I think that gives a good perspective on the different areas. And I'd love if you would chat about, I guess, some of the differences between what you learned in school and then what was actually in practice. So I know we were talking off air about like how, well, you would hope that someone who is like going through an HR program, they would get a job easily because they've been taught like the whole process on how to get into that. But that's not usually the case. So that's one thing that we identified. Like, could you talk to us a little bit more about that, and then other areas where you might have learned something, but the reality is like actually it's quite a bit different.
Yeah. So I would say that just because you took your undergrad in human resources doesn't mean that they've taught you. I think that everybody automatically assumes it. Doesn't mean that they've taught you how to job search and how to effectively strategize and compete with the thousands of new grads when you have like next to no experience, right?
Right.
That's not taught. I mean, back when I took recruitment, which is a while ago, they did teach us how to review resumes, but more so how to review resumes in an equitable way, how to create fair interview questions that are free of discrimination and bias, and how to, create a matrix so you can effectively rate your candidates, again, being free of bias, how to create a comfortable environment. What are some of the things to look at a resume? So, that's what we were taught, but we were never really taught, and I don't know what is being taught in other schools, but we were never really taught as, how do you market yourself on LinkedIn, or how do you land a job? So what I'd say to HR undergrads is it's just going to be as difficult for them as it is for everybody graduating. I'm going to say almost even more competitive sometimes in HR, because again, the number of people in HR departments versus the actual business, right? You're in a support function, so you're naturally always going to be you're always going to have a lower head count than the actual business. Your function is to support them, right? So if they have 5, you're going to have 1, for example, right? So that's where there's a challenge. I'd say some of the things that could help an individual is reaching out to their HR professors, trying to, see if they could recommend them for anything, or write them a letter of recommendation. But we also have the HRPA. That's an excellent resource, right? So they have a mentorship program. So you can get matched up with mentors. You can volunteer for events. I mean, pre-COVID, it was in person, but I'm sure that we'll be back to in person. So you can volunteer, and that's another excellent opportunity to get to know your peers and then get to know other people within HR as well. So I think that that's one of the great things that you could do. And again, I mean, look at if you're so set, for example, on going into compensation or learning and development, and you're a new grad and you haven't been able to get that opportunity, be open, right? Look at, maybe there's an HRIS analyst role. Maybe there's a recruitment position, a recruiter position, right? Maybe there's a payroll analyst. Like, just be open to any kind of HR role that you can, and get your foot in the door, because you might be surprised, you might actually like it. But again, it's experience, and it's kind of your foot in the door. But also, follow Luki. He has a lot of on LinkedIn. He has a lot of really, really good advice, and a lot of good information on there about, as a new grad, how do you market yourself, and try to get as much information as you can, and network on LinkedIn as well. That's definitely helpful.
Cool. I appreciate the plug, and we did an episode, I guess, like a couple ago, that we talked about the recruiting process. So make sure that you check out that and learn a little bit more about that. And speaking a little bit about the HRP, so the HR Human Resource Professional Association. I think that's what exists in Ontario, or is it national?
So the HRPA is for Ontario. I believe it's national, but there's different chapters. So, if you live in, for example, London, Ontario, you'll have your own chapter. So go online and see if you can connect to your own chapter. And another thing that might help set you apart as a new grad in HR is getting your CHRP, because that's just that extra stamp that you understand, employment legislation and employment law in Ontario or the province that you're trying to apply for.
Cool. And then further to that, you can continue on as a professional, get your CHRL, where the first one is, I guess, a practitioner, and then the next step is a leader, where you kind of show, well, I'm really committed to HR, and I've learned enough about that. Have you gone through those certifications, and they're challenging? Are they like really difficult exams and tests?
Yeah. So I've gone through the CHRP. My goal this year is to get the CHRL. Are they challenging? I mean, not really. A lot of it is review from what you would have taken in your undergrad, like a lot of the legislation. The only advice I'd say is try to do it, the sooner you can do it when you're right out of school and the information is fresh in your mind, the better. Because, ultimately, half of the test is legislation that you're just reviewing, and it's a lot of memorization. So if it's fresh in your brain, it's just easier.
Sounds good. So take that sooner than later. And what are some other kind of pieces of SWIKE, the stuff that you wish you knew earlier getting into HR? Or what are some of the other guidance that you'd give to undergrads or folks trying to get into HR?
Yeah, I mean, HR people are generally really friendly. They've gotten into that space usually because they like people and they like helping people. So don't be afraid to reach out to try to network with HR professionals on LinkedIn. They're probably, I'd say, again, this might be biased, but they're probably the friendliest and most open to helping people just naturally develop in their career, because that's kind of what they do. And also, they are the people that you kind of want to reach out to, because a lot of times they have influence in the recruitment side of things. So it's kind of like a win-win. If you reach out to them for mentorship as a new grad, you're going to get happy about that, because again, they like to help people typically, and they might be able to influence your application process, or getting your name, if you're qualified, obviously, on a list of potential candidates for a role that you're interested in.
That's awesome. So I think we gave folks a good overview of HR, and even though it's a small area of business, it's huge on its own. So I think one of the qualifying characteristics which you miss is you gotta like people because you are human.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of came through in our discussions, but hopefully folks kind of got that. Are there any kind of other tidbits or any other information that you'd want to share about HR to the folks that are listening?
Not particularly. Only the only point that I'll share is also, as a new grad, think about, startup versus large organizations, specifically in HR. And there's the benefits in both. Startup, you get to kind of shape the strategy, but you're going to be doing everything. You're the one HR person, and you have to do everything: benefits, payroll, comp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Large organization, you're in a much larger HR team, so there's more opportunities to move into formal roles and learn. But at the same time, there's more policies, and you're not going to get as creative. So it really depends on, what you, based on your characteristics, what you'd be more comfortable working in, because it's a big responsibility. Because a lot of times that we work, things that we do, have legal implications. So it's also a big responsibility. So think about, the level of responsibility and the environment that you'd be most comfortable in.
Yeah. And I guess that goes to probably one of the other ones that we didn't go into too much detail, but like kind of the legal compliance of it, because there are employment laws and stuff like that have to be followed. So don't forget that. And I guess that's another area where those potential lawyers who didn't want to get to labor relations, they could potentially put their hat in on the HR side. So well, thanks so much, Nora, for sharing your perspectives and experience in HR. And hopefully we'll have you back for another episode.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.